now, right?
Adam West still didn't seem like much of a fight, but I just listened. After all, I was writing a scene in which a robotic Walther PPK was fighting a semi-trailer truck, and they were the same size in the scene. So it wasn't like I had the logical high ground.
Reading your book, because I've never written some of
Anyway, we worked out an elaborate scene. Batman had prepped the battlefield.
But it's your
He'd
story.
rigged bombs in a building.
As first person.
I didn't think
it's bombs
would
really
hurt
strange
Superman,
thing to listen
but
to,
I was told they'll keep him busy.
Mesmerizing, and
it was a good enough answer.
I like cringe.
We moved over to our scene.
I really enjoy listening to it.
I said I wanted Optimus's death to feel like Davy Crockett's death in the John Wayne version of The Alamo. I'd seen that movie when I was 5, and it became the centerpiece of my early childhood. Steve's friend hadn't seen The Alamo. Instead, the movie that inspired him the same way when he was a kid was called The 300 Spartans. And by now you've probably figured out that the guy was Frank Miller, and that the Batman comic book he was talking about was the 4th installment of The Dark Knight Returns. I've told this story a lot of times to a lot of people for a wide variety of reasons. Transformers fans love hearing about how Transformers the movie was created. I talk about it in lectures at the USC Film School because that scene is about something a lot bigger than Frank or Steve or I, or even Transformers and Batman. To me, it's about the incredible burst of creativity that happened in the 80s and in other golden,
what happened is the audiobook came out by surprise.
Happy Sunday, everyone. Mike from Hound Dog Media here, and it's time for another episode of Con to Couch. With so many conventions delayed or canceled this year, we're bringing the best guests and coolest hangouts of that experience right to you in the comfort of your own home. We hope you enjoyed the special audiobook preview of The Gamesmaster, almost famous in the Geek 80s. Available right now on audible.com. The hardcover and ebook versions will release on July 14th, and they're available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other major booksellers. If you want an autographed copy, be sure and click our link to Rarebird Publishing and get yours there. Flint is hard at work signing those, so Rarebird can put those right in your hands. Today, we're going to go deep into the archives of 80s animation. Flint is joined by special guest Rick Merwin, along with return guests Buzz Dixon and Doug Booth, and they're going to share, for the first time ever, an uncovered piece of pop culture history. The cult classic animated series Inhumanoids only lasted one season, and today they've got the unaired script of what would have been the Season 2 premiere episode. For more on that, here are Rick and Flint.
Okay, well, we also have Doug and Buzz here, too. And we're going to talk to, this is pretty free form, so we'll talk about whatever we talk about. But we intend to finish up loose ends of the Joe movie and Transformers the movie. But we're leading off now. We have a rare tropical find. I mean, it's like finding a lost book or something. We found Rick Merwin. Okay, and I just sort of casually asked around and said, "Hey, anybody know how to get hold of Rick?" And like nobody knew. And I was getting a bunch of bum leads and people selling me stuff. Meanwhile, I finally went and you went to some old earthlink.net, web address, and after I dusted the cobwebs off it, sure enough, Rick, who has a more modern email address, had it. And he's on his K-Pro today, but it seems to be working pretty well. All right. For anybody, we've referred to Rick Merwin a lot on this show, and because Rick Merwin stretches the whole period of the show. I met Rick at Ruby Spears when I think you came on as an employee right after me or right before me or something like that.
Right after.
Yeah. So I was already there. Okay. And Rick came in, and then Rick wandered over to Sunbow, and he worked on, I think, every show we did at one point or another, except for, some show I've forgotten about. There was that show Doug was talking about last week that I never even heard of. What was that?
What was that?
Not sure, but I mean, I know Rick had worked on a lot of shows together, both Sunbow and not Sunbow. But I don't know if you ever wrote a Glow Friends or a Potato Head Kids or a Robotics or Air Raiders.
Air Raiders was the show.
Yeah.
But Air Raiders came and went too fast. Yeah.
However, what Rick did you worked on Joe, you worked on Transformers, you worked on Gem. You ever write a My Little Pony?
I did. One.
And if most relevant to today, he worked on Inhumanoids. Basically, Buzz and Rick are the only people other than me that ever wrote an Inhumanoids or ever wanted to. But that was they did that, and it was kind of like because and all you guys worked on Visionaries, right? We'll get to that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're all Visionaries vets. And I'm trying to think of what else to tell you about Rick that we won't get pulled off by the standards and practices on Google.
It's the internet. There are no standards and practices.
Right.
Well, we're on Facebook, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it was a funny period of time because we used to talk about this, that the Force would kind of land at different studios for a period of time. The Force landed at Ruby Spears for a while, and all of us were there. And then the Force kind of migrated. Sunbow came along, and the Force moved over to Sunbow.
Yep.
And that was the place to be. That had all the cool shows. It was a fun place to work. We had that great office in Westwood. It was all the stuff that went along with the Force.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm here to attest that the Force exists. It does actually land
No,
different
it's really true. I mean, somebody put it the negative way. They were saying, I was looking at your resume, and it's like you're kind of like Indiana Jones, and every time you run out of a temple, it collapses behind. That would be the negative way of putting it. It's kind of a funny way of putting it.
That's great.
Either that, or we have very good sense of when things are about to collapse.
Timing. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, going to Ruby Spears, you remember what the lighting of the fuse was there. Somebody, and I will not go mention who, went in and said, you writers aren't the creative ones. Joe is the creative ones. All you're doing is executing his ideas. And in about like 15 minutes, we were all on the phones to our agents saying, get us a new gig. And that was literally, I mean, 3 weeks after that, Joe was wondering what the hell happened to my writing staff. They're all gone.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, I don't remember that because I was already at Lucasfilm, I think.
Yeah.
And I always kind of intended to go back. But anyway, this is not about me. Okay, so the other thing about Rick as a writer, what's really funny, and matter of fact, it's true of all three of these guys, is Rick was always like blindingly fast and unbelievably versatile. And that's true of all of you. I mean, all of you wrote squishies, all of you wrote toasters. I mean, it was far more range than I had, and certainly in that period. I mean, later on, I do different stuff. But, I mean, and I remember, it's true of all of you. But I mean, I remember somebody talking about how Rick, it's like it was Stephanie Henning was talking, who was my agent at the time, but Rick's next door neighbor, was saying, I get up at 2:00 in the morning, I look out the window, and there's Rick at his typewriter. And I get up and Rick's still at his keyboard.
That's right. Their living room looked into my office. Yes.
Oh, funny.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I remember I'd hear that and think, he's going to get out ahead. I got to be more diligent. But I don't think it really would have been possible to have worked more than we did then. It just didn't feel like work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you look at the amount of stuff that was produced, I mean, it was 3 shows of 65 half hours plus all the miniseries shows. And it wasn't like, something like, robotics or Inhumanoids. They had less episodes, but the fact is you still had to develop the whole show. And even though there were 22 minutes, you still had to come up with a whole story. I mean, it wasn't like really skipped that much. And also, too, there are 2 interesting things. We ought to talk about Inhumanoids, but I found, I was going to read a segment of it. That would be really boring. Maybe we'll do that. I found the pilot and the first episode, and the second episode, first draft. I think the pilot was approved, and the second episode. How many pages do I have here? The second episode. I guess I got 3 acts in here. The first 2 episodes of what would have been season 2 of Inhumanoids. And Inhumanoids was one of these ones where they just we were in pre-production or we were in production, and they said, hey, we're not picking it up for a second season, and this thing has just sat in my in the mystery box where I hope to someday find Secret of Cybertron and Scepter of Seven Souls, like the lost things. But this one, I actually have it. I've actually read it. It was like I wanted to see it. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but in Humanoids, the set up the context for it, and you guys pipe in whatever you want to, because you know, it was, we had three phenomenon on the air simultaneously at that moment. You know, it was, we had G.I. Joe, we had Transformers, and we had My Little Pony. And even Super Sunday was still like numbered either 3 or 4 to the other ones. I mean, we had 1 through 4 in the ratings. And so Super Sunday and Humanoids was originally written for a show called Super Sunday. And their concept for Super Sunday, and this is the kind of thing you do when you're on top of the world and you think you're indefatigable, was that they did 3 shows or 7 minutes of 3 separate shows, like 7 minutes of Gem, 7 minutes of Inhumanoids, 7 minutes of Robotics.
Mhm.
Right.
And it was continuity, so you'd have to come back, you know, to see the whole show. You'd have to watch all of Super, you know, and that's was how they were introducing new products at that point.
Yep.
And then Gem and Inhumanoids became full series. How would you describe, either Buzz or Rick or you know, or Doug, if you want to, how would you describe the premise of Inhumanoids?
Ghostbusters with manga armor done straight.
that's a pretty good way to do it.
That about sums it up. Yeah, no question.
I was going to say G.I. Joe meets H.P. Lovecraft, but I mean, you know, any of these explanations too. But yeah, you know, it was, I mean, it was of the period of Ghostbusters. It was kind of, what was interesting about it when I was prepping for the show, I was rewatching them, and it was actually funnier than you think it was. Because I think our theory at the time is you had to mix in a lot of comedy so that the horror didn't bother people as much.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you could make a good argument it was the most horrific show that came out during that period. I mean, yeah, some of it's just, you know, kids were legitimately scared and stuff like that.
Oh, the voice actors were legitimately scared. I mean, they balked at my episode. They asked Wally Burr, "Can we actually do this?" I mean, you know, I had people, teenage zombies going through the streets chanting "kill, kill, kill," and they're, my God, what are we doing here? You know?
Yeah, that was not normal Saturday morning fare in 1986.
Yeah, true. We got away with some stuff then, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing, and Buzz put it really well, there's a documentary about Inhumanoids, or a piece somebody did on the internet, and where they'd interviewed Buzz, and Buzz put it pretty well, and that was that by the time we were nearing the end of the scripts, and I don't think it's entirely true because they wouldn't have called for a second season, but there was almost no adult supervision on Inhumanoids, let's put it that way. I mean, except Jay, and he was marginal adult. And the thing that was different about the kickoff of that was, I don't remember during the show having a conversation with Joe. Joe was usually kind of the creative guy.
Yeah.
But I remember the pitch on Inhumanoids happened. I walked into the office. Tom Griffin had his it was a pad of paper, it wasn't a whiteboard, and he drew a picture of the Earth and where all the different Inhumanoids lived. And it was like he was the one that gave me the creative pitch on it. And the cliche always was that Joe was the creative guy and Tom was the business guy, but that was not the case. It was much more complex than that. Yeah. But yeah, he gave me the pitch on it, and then I remember we'll take off on the other episodes, but the pilot, and we talked about this before, but when I wrote the pilot, it was like a week before it was a Friday before my 30th birthday. I was smoking a cigarette. I looked at it looked funny to me. I put it out and never smoked another one again. So the whole time I was writing Inhumanoids, which I wrote the first mini series, which 5 episodes over the next, I think like week, which wasn't that unusual. The problem was I was going through withdrawals. And the sort of the jagged cotton head you quit smoking, didn't you, Rick?
I did, yeah, years ago, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. Remember when you were going through withdrawals, you had that kind of cotton-headed feeling, and it was hard to remember something you were thinking 15 seconds ago, and you couldn't hold this thought for more than 15 seconds, so you had to write really fast, and then you could only key on the last sentence you wrote, and I had an outline, so I could write to the next outline, but I think it added a nice quality to the show.
It did. It made for some very avant-garde dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and also just, I mean, there was everything was immediate and right to the next thing. The other thing that made the show really staccato was that we were working with an animation company, because they didn't send it to Toei, they sent it to somebody new.
Right.
And I think it was the beginning of when Marvel was cutting budgets, and we'd have whole scenes that didn't come back, or whole shots, and so we'd have to build it in post. So you'd steal a shot from somewhere else, or repeat a shot and flop it, and all that. So you have these, flopped reverse shots with, dialogue that we put over, and we still couldn't get it to time. So we invented baseball cards, which shows ought to do, where we just sort of put like a bunch of different footage of Decompose and just gave a little bio of Decompose for 30 seconds, just featuring Decompose. And that's because they stiffed us out of 30 seconds of the show. And so we had to make up a fake 30 seconds, but sooner or later you cut enough 30 seconds out, and it was stuff just randomly didn't come in. It dings your show.
Yeah.
We learned a lot about telling story voiceover, and just like every cheesy trick there was. But so, what episodes did you guys do? Do you remember?
I only did one for that show. At the end of the day, I only did one. I think I had pitched another couple. I had a couple in the hopper that, okay, we'll do those. We like those. We'll do those next season.
Yeah.
And the next season didn't occur.
Right.
What about Buzz? What did you do on that?
Well, I did the one obviously with the teenage zombies in it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to change them back at the end, of course, but for about 2/3 of the episode, I had teenage zombies running loose in Los Angeles.
Yep.
I think going to the second season pilot, you remember Gem was canceled. The toy line was canceled during the first season, but
Yep.
the show was so popular, they kept it on for a second season to advertise other products.
Yeah, exactly.
So they may have been thinking
amazingly
that was
popular.
going to be the future of Inhumanoids.
Yeah. I thought Inhumanoids was a shoe-in for a second season.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it actually did fairly well, but the toys did not. I remember afterwards, and that was where Joe entered the story, Joe Bacall, is I remember saying, well, what do you think happened? Why? And he said, he looked at me, this is a guy who was a partner in what was the fastest growing ad agency in New York at that exact moment. And he looks at me, takes Tendril, I think, and is trying to walk him across the conference room table, and he's fallen over. and making it look really stupid. And he said, sometimes you just can't get past the reality of the product.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we can do the best hype ads anybody's ever done, and you can't get past it. Okay, so here is what I have, Rick. This may I remember this episode. This may jar your memory. Tank Kiev teams up with Krygen and Pyre to harness the power of Boulder of Galvasite, which will make them strong enough to vanquish matter once and for all. However, when the Storm and Fernac, their enhanced magnetic powers run amok, including the reversal of the core's polarity that renders Krygen and Pyre evil while changing Metlar's personality to good. The incident further initiates a chain reaction which threatens to pull Earth's deadly Van Allen belt down to the surface of the planet. Much to his own disgust, the now altruistic Metlar brings himself to work in concert with the Earth Core to restore the natural order. They manage to reform the Galvasite boulder, returning Krygen and Pyre to normal as Metlar reverts to evil and reclaims Infernac. Does that jar any memory from you?
Yeah, it does. I remember really wanting to destroy Earth by crashing the Van Allen belt into it. I thought, no, we couldn't pull it off, though. It was just, that would have been the end of the show and the end of the Earth, and that was it.
Well, no, but what's really kind of fun about that is there weren't many shows, and this is the kind of stuff we snuck in there, that would have even told you about the Van Allen belt.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we usually did sneak stuff in that was like something they normally hear about in class, and that kind of worked. And then yours, Buzz, was called. Do you remember the title of your episode?
I can't recall the title right now.
It was called Cult of Darkness.
Okay.
What's about to happen here? Looking to land a spicy news scoop, investigative reporter Hector Ramirez infiltrates the underground compound of a growing cult movement that has become popular among San Francisco's disaffected teens. This is a timely show. They find more than they bargained for when gathering turns out to be a recruiting scheme fronted by Blackthorn Shore on behalf of the Inhumanoids. Decompose uses his powers to decay and transform the teenage crowd into rampaging zombies who proceed to terrorize the city. It is up to EarthCorps to save the zombified kids without harming them. But in their decayed marauder state, the teens are proving less than cooperative, and the would-be rescue mission goes further afoul when Herc and Augur decompose themselves. However, the rest of the EarthCorps rally back and restore Herc, Augur, and the teenagers.
Yep.
So there you are. Those are the episodes you guys did.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of a fun show. This script, all right, just so people know this real script, I'll read the first two paragraphs. Inhumanoids 1, Season 2, A Bone to Pick. Okay, we always have these titles. I mean, you hear that, guess who's going to be the main character in it? Fade in, exterior of the tomb of King Ethelbert. Night. Ancient circles of stones looking not unlike Stonehenge, sitting atop a high burial mound, glow in the cold moonlight. At the center of the structure is a massive stele, which looks like a tombstone. If we could read the primitive language, we would discover that's exactly what it is. Centuries of stony silence are violated by the rasping voice of Decomposed. I shall harvest my... Well, anyway, that's...
That was Chris Latta, yeah. I figured.
To harvest these guys and decompose. Anyway, so that's the Inhumanoids in a nutshell. And probably if there's a show that I've unfinished business with, that's probably it. So
Yeah.
and it's sort of this one season thing where we've already got the scripts, done for the second season. 40 years later, we come back and finish it. Meanwhile, in this same period, Rick and I teamed up and created for TSR these things called, the name of the franchise was Agents of Fortune. And what it was, do you remember the premise of it, Rick?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was a private intelligence agency, but it was kind of a balance. We thought of it in some ways as sort of a stepchild of Man from Uncle on one hand, kind of inspired a little bit by Man from Uncle, but much more tongue-in-cheek with stories that came out of the headlines. So it gave us a chance to kind of have a mildly satirical take on current events. So like the second one, Hard Sell, was all set in the Arab world. And, it was just, it was all taken out of headlines. So these were like, it was a private intelligence agency for hire by anybody who had the money.
We called it Private Eyes on a Global Beat, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's what gave it the intelligence handle rather than just being Private Eyes.
Well, the head of the company, his name was Fortune, and he was a disgraced guy. We were thinking of like Oliver North or somebody.
Yeah. Exactly.
He leaves the government, becomes a professional. He becomes a for hire guy. And we actually set it up. Remember with John Davis as a TV show back in back in the late '90s. It had to be mid '90s. And then our executive, if we go to have a meeting and he's no longer there, and that's so much for that project.
Yeah.
But yes, so Rick and I are talking about revisiting it. The other story, which is really interesting, was the Royal Pain, and the Royal Pain was the Princess of Wales gets like ensnorgled with some shadowy characters, and they have to go rescue her. But I mean, it's Princess Di basically.
Yep.
And Princess Di obviously was still alive at this moment, or wouldn't have been writing that stuff.
Yeah.
I remember kind of
Or we might have. Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows? We might have. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, we look for Agents of Fortune to come back. The weird thing is, I only have a copy of the Royal Pain. I do not have a hard sell, but you have both of them.
Yeah, I have both. I have one copy of the hard sell left. Yeah. So
But
we'll definitely have to revitalize those. There's a framework there that just works, in sort of in the current zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
It
was
was
kind of prophetic in a way.
Well, yeah, and I mean it's actually more relevant today than then because all sorts of people probably have private intelligence agencies.
Yeah, anybody know Blackwater? It's like how they do exist.
No, they do exist, and I'm sure corporations hire them, and small countries that don't have a CIA hire them, and
Yep.
And all that. So that's our
Or large countries off the books.
Yes.
yeah, exactly. It's like something you don't want
Mhm.
your guys to do because you don't trust them. So you go hire a mercenary company to do it.
Right.
That was the premise of Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
But Mission Impossible, were they their own company? I mean, was there like
Yeah.
a LLC called Impossible
The
Mission?
Impossible Mission Force. That was the name of the company.
Oh, I didn't know they were company. I mean, okay, I did. Full disclosure, we're out of the '80s now, but I did a Mission Impossible game that came out. Came out between Mission Impossible 2 and Mission Impossible 3. And I never knew they were a private company. I mean, it never occurred to me. I thought there was some branch of the government that, just
I think by the time it got to the feature films, it was mutating a bit. But the original pitch was this was a private enterprise espionage agency. And that was why they would always say, the secretary will disavow all knowledge of your action. There was no official connection with, the American government.
Right.
And they would just get hired every week to go out and screw up somebody's life.
Yeah, you see, our guys were the kind of guys that if they got the gold back, they'd kind of take their cut out of it before they gave it to the government, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Matter of fact, I think Hildy became a character in it too.
She did. I think Dille became a character in most of our shows. I
know. What's funny is I tried to get her on this show, and she just said, "No, I kind of freeze up and that stuff, and I can't find the right words." Has anybody here ever see Hildy not be able to find the right words? I didn't.
Never.
No.
Never once happened. So I guess she just didn't want to be on. But yeah, I was trying to get her because she's like kind of this person that runs like a thread all the way through it because she was a Ruby Spears. And at Sunbow, and then after Sunbow was simultaneously an assistant for Steve Gerber, Frank Miller, and myself. Which I mean, imagine who you have to be to be able to pull that off, and everybody thinks you're great.
And was also a story editor at Marvel Comics.
At Marvel, she story edited Barbie, and she was running the TSR New York office for a while, and she was an editor for TSR Comics too. Oh, we're now jumping ahead into another decade. All right, so let's talk. Let's shift over to. You want to finish up on the Joe movie first, Buzz? What else? Should we talk about? No, because we got to finish with Transformers because it came first.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to say about it. I was just listening to the section in the book on it, and it really was. We did all the stories from the Transformer movie. I've either told them in the book or they're publicly known. I mean, there's not a lot, hovering around, left to be explored. I mean, the thing everybody asks about, it'd be interesting to talk to you guys. Pretty much, it seemed to me that it's Sunbow, and you saw it too, Rick, as kind of from the outside, but we all saw it from the inside. That the failure or perceived failure of the Transformer movie. I mean, you can argue whether the expectations are off or the box office was off. But that was the beginning of the end for everything. Yeah, would you say that was true?
I would. Transformers was in part Transformers and G.I. Joe, but probably more Transformers was kind of the identity of Sunbow. When you thought of Sunbow, you thought of Transformers. And because it was just in its time, it was so big and so popular. So when the feature, I mean, I don't know, was that like a really huge box office flop? Was that what happened with that? Because
It wasn't a huge success.
What happened was Dino De Laurentiis was distributing it, and he had promised 3 screenings every Saturday and 2 on every Sunday, because this was obviously meant as a kid movie.
Right.
And he was only able to deliver 2 on Saturday and 1 on Sunday. So about about 2/5 of the anticipated revenue was gone.
Right.
And that strained the relationship between Sunbow and the Dino De Laurentiis people, and so they canceled the G.I. Joe movie. And then, of course, having kids, lock themselves in closets and mourning over the death of Optimus Prime didn't
I
help
think
things.
I think that was the real death knell, so to speak. There were reasons for it, but I thought they were all bad reasons personally.
Yeah.
I thought it was a big mistake.
Okay.
Hey, so it goes.
All right. So, for anybody that doesn't know, the kid locked himself in the closet for a week story, right? And apparently the parents wrote this bad thing. Okay. At the time, I was, a decade away from being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Knowing what I now know, exactly how many minutes would either of my kids have been able to lock themselves in a bathroom or a closet?
Between 1 and 2.
Right.
I mean, probably you got 3. Okay, come out right now, unlock that. And then it's, down, ready, set, hoop, boom, door breaks up and kids distracted, and there's no, and I'm probably not writing letters to Hasbro about it.
There's some parents who would nail the door shut, Flint. So.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. But point is, we all believe that story. I mean, it gets into this weird thing. It's kind of an aspect of the 80s that I didn't talk about at all in the book, but it's an interesting one, where all the hookus stories we believed back then, that, there was, we have fake news now, but then you had widely believed urban myth. Okay. I mean, you could still peddle a Bigfoot story. The whole Gary Gygax, that was technically the 70s, but the story about the guy that, disappeared into the steam tunnels.
We had a literal witch hunt going on. We had the McMartin case that mesticized into this international satanic cult that was killing people and burying bodies and was kidnapping kids out of daycare centers, flying them halfway around the world, molesting them, and then getting them home in time for their parents to pick them up. And it was a very incredulous age, you might say.
Yeah, I mean, we fell for everything. Hence Hector Ramirez.
Yeah.
But the other weird thing is that things did get finally debunked. Mm-hmm. Okay, now you everything always is left on this. Well, maybe it was this and maybe it was that. Whereas then, Hector Ramirez, Geraldo Rivera, actually opens up the safe, 3 beer bottles fall out, and you think he's finished, and he wasn't. It didn't affect him, but he was a fahool for a while. But a lot of the things would just kind of go on being never fully debunked, and we believe urban. That's why Blair Witch a decade later was able to work,
right?
Because you believe whatever medium you see, and then we didn't get a lot of unreliable information, but it was just the beginning of cable, and and all the first shows on cable were things like UFO Mysteries, where they'd have 2 inches of footage they rerun 50 times and then talk in some lunchroom.
Right.
There was an expert. Right. What's really funny in the 80s, you watch the old shows, though, the guy, the scientist they interview that tells you the UFOs are real, he always seemed like a real guy. He had the crew cut and everything. Now you just have some guy who looks like he stumbled out of his, van, and, like that. I guess that's what we believe nowadays.
I'm going to jump all the way back to the 1930s, but there was a guy, I'm trying to remember his name now, but there was this guy that used to circulate these VD and birth movies. And what he basically had was these real sleazy movies that would end with like an actual birth of a child. And he would go into a small town and he would four-wall it. He'd rent a theater and he'd segregate the audience, men only for one show, women only for the other. And he had the world's foremost hygiene authority, some Dr. Elliot Forbush or something like that. Always a different guy every time, every town, just some guy that would come in and deliver the spiel about, you know, being safe and protecting yourself. And then they would sell the booklet for 25 cents, which, you know, like $5 back then. But they'd sell this 25-cent mimeograph booklet, and all the mimeograph booklet was a retyped version of the U.S. government's, you know, booklet on how to avoid, venereal disease. But he'd get up there and he'd sell this thing, and they did land office business. They'd be selling the stuff all over the place. And they must have had about like 40 of these guys playing the same guy in different towns.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that the movie was thinly disguised porno film that they were selling as an sexual.
No. It was a thinly disguised porno film, but at the end of it, they'd actually stick in documentary footage of a baby,
which is how they would get away with it.
And also the funny thing was, they said the worst reaction was always among the men. They said the men were fainting and running from the theater in a panic and all sorts of stuff.
The side of the birth.
If my family is any indicator, I'm far more squeamish than my wife.
Yeah.
Okay, now back to the Transformers season. So I am very much in Doug's camp. I mean, I think that the disappointing box office we could have weathered. The scandal, because what the scandal does, is whether people believe it or not, it was officially believed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It allowed anybody hostile to what we were doing at Hasbro, or who was looking for a new job and wanted to get rid of Sunbow, or whatever their motives were. It gave them a way in the door. You know what I mean? I mean, it was and sometimes you believe a lie for a sinister reason, and I have no evidence of that, but I just have a feeling that's kind of what it was. And
it was sort of metaphorically true, even if it wasn't really true. It was metaphorically true.
Right.
Well, I think no matter who you are, when you're we were occupying a position, and as long as we were there, nobody else could be in that position. So they exploited the problems to.
Yeah, that too. Sure.
Then there was the third thing happening that that was very much in the background, made sense later, and that was Stephen Hassenfeld was sick and was going to die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would add there was a fourth component specific to the three movies, which was, and they learned this lesson the hard way. If you're going to do a movie based on an ongoing TV show, don't introduce new characters. The audience that's coming wants to see the established characters on the big screen. They don't want to be pushed aside to see new characters being fobbed off on them.
Okay.
And they recognize that because that was one of the things the audience reacted negatively to in all three movies.
Well, here's the other question that gets to the big question. And since this is we're kind of tying off Transformers the movie, unless people have questions, for later episodes. But the big question is, okay, should we have killed all those guys or not?
No,
you shouldn't. I should have been able to kill Duke, but you shouldn't have killed any of the robots.
But
I say that I have a very logical reason. You can run a robot over with a steamroller. You can smash him into little bits. You can melt him down, and then you can always build him again. You can't do it with a human being. And my pitch about killing Duke, because they told me they were going to cycle Duke out of the product line, I said, we've been doing this war show. We've never killed anybody in it. Let's, for the movie, have something big. Let's have a dramatic death. Let's kill Duke off if you're going to get him out of the product line. And For the G.I. Joe audience, I think the audience would have accepted it because our audience was about like 10, 12 older. For the Transformers audience, it was 10 and under for the most part. And those kids were in the theater with their parents. And their parents are there watching God knows what. They can't follow what's going on. It's just brightly colored machines bashing each other. And then all of a sudden their kids are traumatized and crying. You know.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I have exactly opposite. In other words, I have conflicted feelings. 90% of the time, my official answer is we wouldn't be talking about Transformers right now if we hadn't killed them. That it validated for people how much they liked Optimus Prime, how much he mattered to them. It became, this thing, he'd be just like, Varlash on some other show, if we hadn't done it. Part of me believes that. Okay. So I believe that. I also believe that what we did was, as I said, these are two conflicted thoughts, is part of the magic of what we had and what people still love about those 80 shows is they were an absolute, before anybody invented the term, safe place. In other words, people get shot all day long, nobody got hit. But planes would crash, parachutes always popped out. And so you could go to watch any one of our products and see a real action show. I mean, it was not like, the goofus stuff that was on Saturday morning where you could have no action or adventure. We actually had it. But you were safe and you knew it wasn't going to hurt. And all of a sudden we do this movie that hurts a lot. And we violated something. And I have those two thoughts in my head simultaneously. The one, it was the wrong thing to do because that wasn't the deal we made. The other is, if we hadn't done it, nobody'd remember this stuff. And they're kind of conflicting thoughts. I could argue it either way. And I feel a different thing every time I talk about it.
Yeah. And on the other hand, if the Transformers movie, not to say that it would have, but let's say it was a brilliant, heroic, fabulous action adventure movie and went on to make more money than any animated feature had ever made before or since, because it was the most popular animated property at that time, we probably would still be talking about it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. I mean, it would be interesting to know the alternate universe of these things do really well. Because Doug said it's one of the most astute things anybody's ever said to me about media. we were crossing paths coming out of the sweetening sessions at where they had Glen or Paramount. Glen was at Paramount, right?
Glen was at Paramount. Yeah.
So we're walking. He's leaving Paramount, I'm coming, or the other way around. And we were talking about watching regular episodes on a giant screen because we'd watch them for the sound sweetening.
Yeah.
And we're saying, if you just fixed all the animation, cleaned it all up, got the in-betweening done, you can make movies out of that. Which gets to another thing, and that is, could they have been a series of movies that were 2x the price of a regular episode, but were not 200x the regular episode, done about the same business as they did, and just ended up being this kind of successful little series?
Yes, I'm sure they could have, and just had slightly bigger stories. And yes, I'm sure they could have.
That's what an anime used to be referred to as OAV, original anime video. They would have a TV show. The show might have a movie spin-off, and then kind of occupying the space in between, a higher than TV grade animation quality animated 45-minute episode, basically a super episode. But it wasn't big enough, it wasn't expensive enough to warrant putting it in a theater. And they had a market for that. There were a lot of people that liked those because they could do them without, censorship. They could do them without any limitations that the networks would put on them.
Right.
I mean,
that would have been awesome. Yeah, that would have been really fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the other option. And then, to what extent do we believe? Yeah, if De Laurentiis had distributed the way they were supposed to, maybe there would have been a critical mass. I don't know any part of me believes that there would have been a big difference, but I don't know.
Yeah,
there is a arc to this sort of thing. And I mean, one of the things that I remember Joe and Tom talking about was that they anticipated at the end of 7 years, they would have cycled through their audience and they would have except
Brand
for the
new
diehard
audience.
fans, they would have a brand new audience,
Right.
and they could basically reintroduce the show, the concept, every 7 years.
Mhm.
And we just may have been coming to the downhill slide for our particular generation of Joe and Transformers and whatnot. And, you know, we were the trendsetters. We were the guys that did it first. We set the bar that everybody else had to come afterwards and you know, address the fact that that's where the bar was set. And I'm sure some of them did, you know, really fine jobs. But we had the luck of being the first ones. Nobody had ever done it before us. So nobody could say, well, you didn't do it as well.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody could make that argument.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one thing, and kind of, we can all have sort of our last word on Transformers, the movie, and talk about something else. But I mean, the one thing I do believe is that the actual product, I mean, also was a very narrow cast movie. If you knew nothing about Transformers, I mean, there are a number of ways you can do things. Like, I went and saw the Downton Abbey movie. Okay. And I'd watched most of Downton Abbey, you know, so I was familiar with it. But what was interesting about it is their strategy was, if you've never watched Downton Abbey, you know, you're going to be able to watch this movie and you'll like it. If you're a hardcore Downton Abbey fan, you're going to like it for the same reason everybody liked, you know, seeing Kirk and Spock again in the first Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? You remember everybody applauded when, you know, and Scott, every time one of the major people appeared. Yeah. I mean, what I do totally believe is that the audience that hit, it hit them like a bullet. You know, I mean, I never thought in 1985 that I would be sitting in a room with 400 people, have the sound breakdown on the movie, and the audience knew the dialogue. They were saying the dialogue. And they'd sing the jingles, they'd sing the songs when they came up, and we finally just, I don't even think we turned the sound back on. So cool to watch the a cappella version of the Transformer movie with that movie really meant something.
Rocky Horror. Yeah.
And I mean, what we did, what you can at least say for that, and that may well have been what kept it alive and kind of kept people going through the Michael Bay movies, which I've never met anybody, you know, that said, oh, you know, those Michael Bay movies, those are really great. They changed my life. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever, they're good enough. They're methadone, you know? And it was, so if you said you were playing really long game, you're saying we're going to make a movie that's not going to make a lot of money in 1985, but it's our franchise alive for 40 years. So I mean, that's my other kind of final weird thought.
Maybe, yeah. It's like breaking the bone, and when it heals, it becomes stronger. Yeah.
Well, or you just. You probably overspent, but you micro-targeted, and probably over all these years made its money back. You know,
I'm sure it's done that. I'm sure it's done that.
And the other thing, in fairness to us, and now I'm kind of morphing just into more general 80s, but we had no idea. I remember, like, fandom the way it exists now, we were seeing the beginning of it. You know, Star Wars was really new. Star Trek and Star Trek conventions were a whole new thing, and they were an anomaly. You know, no other show than Star Trek really had those kind of conventions.
Right.
You know, and that happened in the 70s, right, Buzz?
Yeah. The Star Trek phenomenon started up in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. But by the 70s, there were specific Star Trek conventions as opposed to conventions where they would have Star Trek programming.
Yeah. Because what's funny about it is we hit dead center of, I think, the moment the core of fandom hit. I mean, obviously Star Wars kept a huge fan. That's not, my point is not that we created, but my point is we hit a moment where people could buy VHSs and watch it, and they were affordable enough. There was syndicated TV, so you could rewatch stuff. You know, you had an amazing amount of ability to see stuff for the first time ever. I mean, if, you know, there was a Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode that ended up with Ilya Kuryakin underneath the Pit and the Pendulum thing, and Napoleon Solo was about to die. I had to wait 30 years to find out. I mean, I was pretty sure they didn't die in the next banger, but I had to wait 30 years to actually see it. This was the first time this stuff was available and around and persistent.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, here's a question for you guys. What was the first moment? it's hard to remember this, but a first moment where you realize, oh my God, something different's happening here, and there's this thing called fandom.
Oh.
Well, for me, I came in through fandom because, you know, as I've told people, my family moved a lot when I was growing up. I gravitated to science fiction fandom because that way my friends were always no further away than the mailbox.
Right back.
And I came in through it from fandom. I was already well acquainted with fandom by the time I was writing for television and whatnot. A lot of other people, they didn't realize this was out there, and for some of them, I won't say it was intimidating or scary, but it was certainly outside their area of experience, and they couldn't quite grasp what was going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And my first, I was aware of fandom in an objective way, just because, you know, living in Southern California, there's movie fan magazines and all, you know, all that gossip magazines, all that kind of stuff. Been around since the 30s or 20s or how, you know, but I didn't really experience it in a subjective way until one day I was in the airport. I was waiting to pick up my bags, and I'm talking to some, like, you know, Japanese guy who's in his 20s. He's transitioning through. We're just talking about what we do. And I said, I was a writer. I wrote, you know, oh, what have you written? You know, the usual conversation. Children's television. I mentioned I'd written Transformers. And his eyes got as big as dinner plates.
Wow.
Oh my God. And he whips out a pen and a pad. Can I get your autograph?
Wow.
I told Flint about this the other day. So Flint couldn't miss anything. And that was my first subjective experience that, wow, I mean, something that I worked on has that kind of following. And this wasn't that many years ago. I mean, this was this is a fan who was like watching this stuff when he was a little kid.
Yeah, things really changed. You know, I mean, it's like what I think is interesting is, remember, there was a recession going on when a lot of stuff was airing. Right. I remember Tom Griffin talking about that, and I remember we had this conversation. Well, then we put in older stuff so Dad isn't embarrassed to watch this thing. You know, Dad's at home. And probably it was a weird bonding kind of thing for, you know, and I'm just saying Dad generically, maybe moms were watching it too, but it was not idiotic cartoon stuff that an adult wouldn't watch.
Right.
You know, it worked at a number of different levels, and that might be part of it too, because even at conventions now, you know, Dad is now Grandpa. Okay, you know, the kid is now Dad, and it's a third generation franchise now.
Right.
Almost to the point where nobody doesn't know what it is, and if you survive that long, you're around forever as long as you refresh now and again.
Right.
You know, and what, Buzz?
I was saying, when you start hearing late night, you know, talk show hosts making passing references to Optimus Prime or G.I. Joe or something, and they expect everybody in the audience to get it, you know, your work has had an impact.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. Buzz took me to the first Comic-Con I ever went to, and that, I want to say that was '83, but it could have been '84. I remember you describing to me what Comic-Con was going to look like, and it was in the old San Diego Hall. Yeah, that really was about comics. Yeah, we stayed at the Westgate. And like, everybody was there, you know. I mean, there's Jack Kirby, there's Will Eisner, there's, you know, Stan Lee, all the like original guys were still there, and they were very accessible. Yeah. And you walked around, it really was about comics. But that, you know, that's when I bought all the pulps, you know, which was, you know, what we were talking about last week with Agent 13. But and then somewhere, you know, around the time they moved out of there, then it just blew up to be something different. Yeah, and I saw that happening at Gen Con in a very parallel way, but it's not quite the same fan stuff.
Well, there are two people that should be mentioned in that context, and that's Craig Miller and Charlie Lippincott.
Yep.
Because both of them were working with Lucasfilms, overlapping but not, you know, exactly parallel. And Charlie got the licensing deals up and going, and Craig was like the fandom. I mean, I'm grossly oversimplifying Craig's job, but he was like the fandom liaison. And his
Huh.
job was to go out there and find the hardcore sci-fi fans and get them worked up and get them to drag their families to go see Star Wars. Well,
Huh.
it turned out there were a lot more sci-fi fans than anybody had anticipated, and
Yeah.
it
Yep.
proved to be a huge success when it hit.
No, Charlie Lippincott was huge. You know what I mean? You know that. You know, in that. I mean, I didn't meet him till late. He was a executive at Columbia when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't meet him in a Lucasfilm context, though he was. Well, I got the job at Lucasfilm, but I didn't know that about Craig. But that's the other interesting thing about doing these kinds of shows where you can talk for a long time. It's like I'm learning stuff every time we do this because we never had this conversation organically. And you know, and I didn't know stuff like Don Glued. I'm watching a special about John Milius, and I find out he was in the same class.
Yeah, right.
And Randy Kleiser, and I mean, it's like
Yeah.
really George Lucas. Yeah, I had no idea.
Mhm.
He and Kleiser were roommates.
I mean, I don't know
Wow.
where Craig Miller came from or what he did. I mean, I
Yeah,
knew him as
yeah.
an animation writer and kind of a guy that's always around.
Yeah, I met Craig through the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society,
Huh.
and it was only later that I became aware he had also been working at the same time with the Lucas people, getting the stuff up and running that became the specific Star Wars fandom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there are all these backstories. Okay, now the G.I. Joe movie. All right, are we done with the Transformer movie? Anything left?
Yeah.
No, I'd like something, but whatever it was, I'm quite sure I'll get to talk about it again sometime. All right, so G.I. Joe movie. All right, so Buzz. I mean, you were the G.I. Joe movie, so it's like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, my input on the G.I. Joe movie predated it because when we were starting season 2 of G.I. Joe, I had pitched a episode called "The Most Dangerous Man in the World," in which the equivalent of Cobra's Karl Marx or Friedrich Nietzsche has escaped because Cobra Commander's been holding him prisoner. He escapes. Cobra suspends all their operations worldwide to try to track him down. The Joes have no idea who this guy is. They just know if Cobra wants him, we got to get him first. So there's a race to whoever's going to get this guy first. The Joes catch him, and then they find out he's the biggest pain in the ass that you could possibly hope to imagine. And he escapes from the Joes at the end, and the Joes just go, let him go. He's as much of a threat to Cobra as anything. Just let him do what he wants. I pitched this, and Hasbro said, "Yeah, we love it. It's great. Go ahead to script. Just make sure there's a place for the Cobra Emperor in it." I said, "The Cobra who?" And they said, "The Cobra Emperor." And I said, "Well, who's the Cobra Emperor?" And they said, "Well, he's the guy that runs Cobra." And I said, "No, he's not." I said, "We've just spent an entire season and God knows how many miniseries establishing Cobra Commander as the supreme leader. We've got to explain where this guy comes from." So they asked me to come up with 2 ideas, and I did. And the first one was, building Serpentor out of the DNA of various warriors in the past.
Right.
That became the miniseries Arise, Serpentor, Arise.
Right.
But the second idea involved a lost civilization that was actually behind Cobra. So we skip ahead to when the Joe movie was going to be done. And Ron Friedman, who you had on a couple of weeks ago, Ron was contractually obliged to do the first draft on any G.I. Joe movie. So he turned in a draft, and I can't remember. The only thing I remember about it is the only character we kept over was Nemesis Enforcer, the guy with the wings. And Joe and Tom asked me to read it and give them some feedback, and I gave them some feedback, and they said, "Well, what would you suggest we do to fix it?" And I said, "To be really honest with you, I would suggest just putting it aside and starting afresh and do a brand new one." And they said, "Come out to New York and talk with us, and we'll decide what we're going to do." So I flew out to New York. I had come up with a basic idea that, involved this lost civilization. And they gave me the go ahead and told me to do it. But then they also said, you've got to introduce all these supporting characters, the
Right.
Sergeant Slaughter's Renegades, and then there were the new recruits, and they were hoping to take the Cobra Law characters and turn them into another generation of villains. And there are parts of the movie that I wish they had let me have one last chance to do a rewrite on, because when Cobra Law was meant as a placeholder name, I did not think they were going to go with it. I begged them not to. I said, let me come up with something else. They turned it down. The battle cry for Cobra Law, that was meant to be done by somebody who could get their voice into this really high-pitched, shrill cry. And they gave it to Dick Gautier, who was Cobra La 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 La. And I was like, no, please, let me come up. Give me 5 minutes. I begged them in the recording session. I said, give me 5 minutes. I'll come up with a better battle cry. And no, we're going to go with it. So there are specific things I wish I could have had the chance to tweak and improve. But all in all, I'm pretty much satisfied with the story. I'm happy I did it. I apparently, when we did it, we were one of the very first movies to mention DNA. We were one of the first movies to mention Tesla's broadcast energy transmitter. It's a very sci-fi movie, and most of the criticisms that I've read of people who don't like it because it was so sci-fi. But I have to say, after finally seeing it up on its feet in front of an audience that liked it and appreciated it, I've come to love my bastard stepchild. So
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So when you watch it now, you like it, because Buzz and I were going to try to watch it this week, and then I got sucked into signing books. So that was that.
We do have one question from the chat here. Looks like this would be probably best for Buzz. That comes from, let's see. That's from Agent Axiom. He says, this one never really seems to get asked, but aside from Duke's death and Zorana's unmentionables, is there anything in particular that comes to mind that got cut from the movie?
We cut a few bits of action in some of the fight scenes, and towards the end, it seems a little rushed because it was, and it didn't quite have the full scope I was hoping for, but nothing like the Zorana scene or like Duke's death. Everything that else that got cut was cut for time constraints.
Oh, very good. And second question is from the Melvor, and this seems just kind of a general question posed to everyone here. And he wants to know what you guys all think of the current state and the quality of popular animation and cartoon shows as they stand right now.
Boy, anybody have an answer? I mean, I have not been keeping up. I mean, once my kids stopped watching them, which was like an Avatar era, which was brilliant, and Clone Wars and Teen Titans and stuff like that. I just haven't been keeping up. There's just so much stuff out there. Every once in a while, I'll watch the odd thing that somebody on Facebook tells me to watch.
Right. My kids got me into South Park, which I absolutely loved. That's some. I'll try to think if there's any others that come to mind.
I'm a huge fan of the Venture Brothers. Flint, you would probably like them too, because it started out as kind of a parody of Johnny Quest, and then it became its own show, its own thing, and it went off in really strange and interesting directions. But it's very much plugged into pop culture and pulp fiction. Yeah, the Venture Brothers.
All right, here's my question. Okay, like I know Buzz has his like ear to everything and knows everything that's going on everywhere for any reason. But like, I don't know about stuff unless somebody tells me. And weirdly enough, the algorithms on Netflix and Amazon are very good at giving me more of what I've watched. Mm-hmm. They're very not good at giving me new stuff. I'd say the same thing as Spotify. Right. Spotify will give me all sorts of classic rock albums, but it's like Zane by chance will be playing something that'll sound really good, and that's how I find out about new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I've not been really following up on children's television animation. The only thing I really have any contact with at all is some of the primetime or adult animation shows, most of which, don't really have an impact for me. There are moments. There are definitely moments in some of those shows that are wonderful. But when you take like the overall impact of one of those shows, then they don't really have an impact to me. Some of the stuff we were doing in the 80s was much more, and we did this consciously, I think. At least I know I did, and I know you guys did. We're much more sort of socially relevant, set, playing on the absurdities that were going on in the world around us.
Well, I think I'd say we were events relevant. What we were not after, and part of what we were rebelling against when with Real Fists was I think really avoided. We just got away from. We didn't want to do anything that had any kind of a message attached to it.
Right.
I mean, it was stuff. In other words, there would be things you could call, kind of, topical, but they came from a very sincere place. I don't think any of us really thought, let's go in and we're going to really change people's minds about the world by what we put in a cartoon. I just don't think we believe that.
No,
you're raising an interesting.
Yeah.
Raising an interesting question there, Flint, for me. It's something I've thought about with G.I. Joe. We had this show that was on the air, 3, 4, 5 years, 5 days a week. And every day we were talking about a ruthless terrorist organization out to take over the world. And when our audience was in their early 20s, 9/11 hits. And, I'm not saying we led to it directly, but we certainly had planted in people's minds the concept of a ruthless terrorist organization out to conquer the world. And how much of our reaction was made easier to sell because we had kind of primed the pump for it, with G.I. Joe. I don't know, but it's something I've wondered about quite a bit.
It's a really interesting. It's a really interesting, thing. I mean, because we were both, acting and reacting to all of it. Does that make sense? In other words, it's like Abdul Fakadi, who was Muammar Gaddafi. We were reacting to Muammar Gaddafi, but to some extent, you're right. We were out doing different stuff. I mean, we were out. Sort of. I wouldn't say predicting things, but we were thinking about what was going to happen.
Well, but the other thing is that we were also showing a heroic and I don't know, whatever you want to say, response to the something that could be identified as evil. And our heroes were comrades in arms. They supported each other. They had lots of really good human values, and they generally triumphed over it. And to me, that's the good part of action adventure shows, because you're showing that, there is adversity in the world and you can overcome it. And here's one way you can do it. And to me, that was the antidote that we provided to that.
Right.
No, I think that's true. You could probably argue how many guys were in special forces in Desert Storm or War on Terror later were guys that watched our show.
Many of them. Yeah.
Do we influence anybody? I don't know. I just don't know how that works.
Speaking of that, I can actually tell you about one particular comic creator who's out there that's an Army and a Marine veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, who talks about being in the Marine Corps during the 2003 Iraq push, and talks about having a Snake Eyes figure in his web gear.
Wow. All right,
Actually,
well, I guess
wow.
somebody had watched the show before they went to the War on Terror.
Yeah.
I mean, that is undeniable. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, okay, so I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. It's like I think that if you write something you think is true, it actually can kind of affect the future and how things are perceived. I don't think you can fake it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look
I mean, I
at
don't think you can lecture people and change
Yeah.
anything.
But that's
Well, I mean,
that's
look-
what I liked about our shows, all of them. I mean, the Squishies, the Toasters, whatever. We were allowed to really love our stories, and
Mhm.
we were allowed. Nobody was saying, "Oh, you got to dumb this down." I mean, yeah, they were, but we were really allowed to tell the stories we wanted to tell, and because we were given a little bit of the reins of production, we were able to kind of shepherd them all the way through to the end, where we could make them as good as we possibly could. And I know all of us really loved our shows,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we weren't faking it. We weren't
No,
preaching, and we weren't
Never
talking down to anybody. We were telling stories that we really, really had fun doing.
Yeah, no, there was never a moment of I don't remember, and it's really funny because it's that's a really great point, Doug, because it's hard to notice what doesn't happen. I
Mhm.
don't remember a single cynical moment. I
Mhm.
don't I don't remember, and I do remember hearing that earlier in my career. I don't ever remember in like Sunbow days hearing anybody say, "Oh, we're just doing crap for kids." Yeah,
Mhm.
never heard anything
Mm-mm.
that
Mm-mm.
remotely sounded like that.
Mhm.
I
It's a
mean, look
really
at the shows that were imitations of our shows, and you look at how completely lacking they are in anything memorable, because they were created just to sell product.
Yeah.
And they weren't given the freedom to do stories, to express themselves in a way that the staff thought they could express themselves in.
But I mean, do you think anybody, because I mean, a lot of the people who worked on our shows were people that did other stuff. And do you think anybody at any point just said, hey, yeah, I'm just doing this to pay the bill? I mean, because there is,
Sure.
I heard
Yeah.
attitudes a lot, in other contexts in my life of, I do this so I can go do my real art. And I remember thinking, well, this is your real art. I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah.
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 You have occasions, and I mean, look, it happened at Ruby Spears with the Mork and Mindy show. We're handed a show and said, do an animated Mork and Mindy show, and every effort to actually do an animated Mork and Mindy show was thwarted and told, no, don't do that. Do this dumb, generic Hanna-Barbera style kid show. And it was very frustrating because you had Robin Williams was contractually obliged to do the voice, and it's like you can
Wow.
actually animate what comes flying out of Robin
Oh
Williams'
my
mouth.
God.
Let's
Yeah.
just let him run. And no, it's going to be done, the dumb, stupid way, because
Mhm.
that was the way they were comfortable with. That was the way they sold it to the network.
Yeah.
That's where it was going.
Yeah.
It's really funny. The question I'm tempted to ask, because I've been, trying with this, the show, and certainly the book. I don't say anything bad about anybody. But the question I'm tempted to ask is something we used to talk about in the day. Is like, what the lowest slink project you ever worked on was. Was there a project where you just thought, this is a low slink?
Mhm.
Little Clowns of Happy
What
Town.
if you don't, what if you don't name the show, but you just talk about it in general terms? Why it was a low slink?
Well, I'll name it. I'll name mine. It was Little Clowns of Happy Town, because you remember there was that group that was telling all the networks, we know what's wrong with your shows and we can fix them. And if you let us, edit your shows for you, we'll give you these hit shows that won't offend parents and are good for kids. And I forget which network it was, but one of them actually gave them the reins to create a show. And they created a show called The Little Clowns of Happy Town, where basically every character, it was like Shakes the Clown, only done for kids.
What studio
And
did that, Buzz?
So to give you an idea of what their thinking was on the show, the clowns could not throw pies at one another. The clown could put the pie on the ground, and then another clown walking along could accidentally trip and fall into the pie, but he couldn't,
Yeah.
he couldn't throw
Boy,
the pie
that's
at
a big
anybody.
humor they got going there.
Yeah, I
And,
remember some of those contortions that the standards and practices would foist off on us. It was just
Right.
like, really.
Right.
Well, I mean, I mean, to a point where they almost made it impossible to do good stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I mean, okay. Here was an interesting thing. So when I was researching the book, you know, because the first thing I ever wrote was a show called The Puppy. Okay, it was a
Yep.
Top classic. Yeah, I think all of us wrote a puppy. I mean, not Doug, but Buzz, do you ever write a puppy?
I wrote a puppy.
Yep.
Yeah,
I wrote a puppy.
No,
Yeah,
I never wrote a.
Okay, you know, and I didn't think, oh, this show's a real grunt and a splash. You know, I didn't think that at all. I just, you know, but I know it was my first show ever, and you know, Mark Jones was my story editor. And he pitches me this, thing. It was okay. So I want this to be called Puppy in the Badlands, and they're going to run across Mount Rushmore, and then a biplane's going to chase them around, right? And it's going to be Puppy in the Badlands. Maybe any of that sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah.
And I wrote Puppy in the Badlands. But anyway, so I was trying to look up the show, just trying to see what episode was it, or, you know, is there anything I can't remember? Vanished without a trace. Now, The Puppy was a show that I think was successful enough to be on a network for 3 seasons.
Wow.
It was, you know, aired in a network environment where there were only 3 choices for kids, and that was a successful show. So there had to be millions of people watching it. Okay, it is almost unfindable on the internet. I'm not even sure it's got a Wikipedia page. Yeah, maybe it does by now, but it's like all of that stuff that, you know, and Mr. T, oddly enough, a certain number of people remember that, which was, you know, the other main thing I wrote while I was at Ruby Spears, because like
Yep.
Rick, you wrote like Supercade stuff. You wrote Donkey Kong and Space Ace, and
Yep.
I mean, Buzz, you wrote everything there, right?
Gary Greenfield and I, this will kind of answer your question. Gary Greenfield and I were given the task of adapting Q*bert as an animated show. And we brainstormed some ideas, and we came up with, it's a 4-dimensional version of the Roadrunner and the Coyote.
Right.
You know, because if you remember the game, Q*bert can change the orientation on the screen. You know, he's operating on these pyramids, but the pyramids can be oriented in different ways.
3D puzzle game, you know.
Yeah. And so that we came up with a ton of gags that were all based on that. They were like 4D, you know, switch your point of view type gags. And we go in to show this to Joe, and he literally took it out of our hands, tossed it in the trash can,
Wow.
and said, "We're going to do Q*bert as Happy Days." And it, you know,
Yes. Right.
Uh,
Right.
All right,
it's like, what is the connection between Q*bert and Happy Days? There is none. But, you know, that was the show he sold.
I mean, did any of those shows work? And
No.
when was the last time anybody asked you about any of those shows?
Those video game shows. I'm hard pressed. I mean, maybe at one episode, maybe a gag here or there, but on the whole, they didn't work for me. I'll give you a little anecdote here about Donkey Kong. Remember Donkey Kong, right?
Yeah.
And the way it was played was Donkey Kong was sort of this real ape, and he had, you know, the girl that he would go save and all this kind of stuff. But it was kind of played with this sort of stately timing, like the video game. We had a storyboard artist who had been, like, I guess he was a freelancer. He was signed on to do one episode, and he did Donkey Kong right. He did him in the old Looney Tunes, bounce him all over the screen for, you know, whatever reason you want to at one time. And Ken Spears, he would look at it, he said, "This is how Donkey Kong should be."
Mm-hmm.
And he handed the storyboard to Joe and said, Joe went off and continued to do Donkey Kong the way we had been doing it. And it was just, this character could be so much more interesting. And we took those kinds of visual liberties with it in a medium that invites you to take visual liberties.
Yeah. Rick, do you remember how Ken used to come in and sneak jokes into the writers?
Yes.
He would be so frustrated that, his creativity was so frustrated. He'd come back into the writers' offices and say, hey, you ought to do this, you ought to do that. And, of course, if one of the producers, if one of the guys whose name is on the studio comes in and suggests something, you do it.
Yeah.
But he couldn't say it to Joe and have Joe accept it. Joe would always find a reason not to do it. But if he fed it to us, we could get it into the scripts.
Right.
No, it's true.
Yeah, those video games, well, they were such big business at the time, and the networks.
Talk about in the book, they were referred to it in the trade. I think it was the term actually Joe came up with as golden ashtrays. And what you had to do is go license the golden ashtray, and that was whatever the studio would buy, just because it was what it was.
Right.
Supercade. No individual one of those shows was a real golden ashtray, but the hope was they would add up to a golden ashtray.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just, it was just whatever people would buy. And in fairness to Joe, I don't think he really, got a big pitter patter out of the stuff either.
No, probably not. But he knew the networks. He knew what he could sell to the networks, and so he would go in that direction, knowing. He understood the business, like probably nobody else, like few others did.
And we said this in the last show, but let's not forget this. These are the guys who created Scooby-Doo.
Yep.
And and you talk about an incredibly strong franchise that has endured as well as anything.
Yes.
Certainly anything animated and created for animation over the last 5 decades. I mean, my kids, the Scooby-Doo was, that was something they would watch together, and those things were few and far between.
Yep.
That stuff was incredibly, so it's kind of like, it would be really, I always wondered what Joe would do if he was the golden ashtray and he could have done any show he wanted to. It probably would have been something pretty close to Thundar.
Have we talked about the Ruby Spears Transformers connection?
Well, Turbo Teen?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that last time. Yeah, that was a sorry. But nevertheless, as I was saying then, I felt like a maroon too, because remember, you took us down. We go on these field trips at Ruby Spears, and you took me down to Japantown, which I'd never been there before. I had no idea it existed. And I bought these little Transformers. And here I'm working for development in an animation studio. It doesn't occur to me to make these into a show. I was mesmerized by them. But, because I didn't make the leap. And this was part of the genius. It looks obvious now, but this is part of the genius of Griffin and Bacall is I think they were the guys who decided, okay, remember Hasbro said, it costs us 6 cents to put a figure inside these things, so we're not going to put a figure in there. And the robot is the character, and that was the genius of it. And to think, let's make these the characters, and then kind of the arbitrariness of how decisions get made. Apparently Joe was, stuck in traffic on the way to LaGuardia or something, and he had to make a decision on how you could tell a good Autobot or a good Transformer from a bad Transformer. And Joe decided cars are good. Planes are bad. That was it. And, I would have thought, well, let's make all of the bad characters. I would have overthought it. And there are a million things wrong with maybe he's deciding to make all cars good. But the weird thing is, it worked. That's a really magic of creative decisions is, how do you know it's going to work? Does that make any sense?
It does. It definitely had a sense of what would work and what would sell. And the only times I had serious disagreements with Joe was when he would try to be a little cautious, so that he wasn't going to run afoul with the networks.
Well, and our job was to push him. I'm quite sure he was more frustrated than we were.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But he just knew. What's the point? I go in and and I'm going to get a wedgie. let's skip that meeting. But the stuff he was letting, I mean, there were times in development we were doing things I don't think any of us believed was really going to be a show. Now, he may have had some other agenda, like I could sell this as a toy line or something, but like, Jack Kirby and I were sitting around for 3 weeks, making Prometheus. I mean, I'm looking at stuff he's drawing and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But, I knew, even I, at that point, as noob as you get, knew this is not going to appear on any television station ever.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe, he saw out ahead of it. And what's really funny is, under the right circumstances, I think that would have sold in the toy show era.
Mm-hmm.
If he figured out how to do it, except it was an original, it wasn't a golden ashtray. And I don't really, I guess you sell Thundar by saying it's really He-Man, and then give it the secret sauce.
We preceded He-Man.
Yeah.
We were out before He-Man.
That's right. Thundar was before He-Man. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So how did that happen?
It happened because they had not yet had the breakthrough about the toys,
Which was He-Man. Yeah.
Right.
There had been a show called Hot Wheels that aroused the ire of a lot of parents and parent groups because they said it's a 30-minute commercial for the toy.
Right.
And the Federal Communications Commission passed a ruling, no toy-oriented shows. Jump ahead several years, NBC wants to do the Smurfs, which everybody knew as these little tchotchkes. And they were frustrated because they were toys and they couldn't base a show on the toy. And then somebody said, well, the toys are actually based on a Belgian comic book. And that was the little tiny opening there.
Right.
After that, Strawberry Shortcake was a toy line, but it was a toy line that started off of greeting cards, and that was printed material. So, okay, that's all right. Mattel and DC rushed a He-Man and the Masters of the Universe comic that has nothing to do with the show. They rushed that into production, a 3-issue miniseries, just so they could say, well, we're not basing it on the toy, we're basing it on the comic book. My grandson is trying to get my attention. Hang on a moment. But anyway, and then after that, G.I. Joe and Transformers were comics.
Right.
And then at that point, the FEC said with syndication, the rules are out the window. You just go ahead and do whatever you want.
Yep.
And that was what
Hi,
started.
Ronan. This is Ronan. This is my grandson, Ronan.
Hey.
Ronan.
Say hi to
Hi, Ronan.
Doug and Rick and Flint, okay? Oh. What do you want? No. We can't reach that, Ronan. Ronan, may I finish talking with my friends? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He made a big hit. Don't worry. Yeah. No, leave that one on, please. He almost hit the switch that controls all the electricity in the room.
Ooh.
Don't want that.
Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was remarkable how a couple of kind of, I will call them trends, because the word didn't exist then, wound up having Congress get involved. That was one, with the SEC rule on no toys. Another one was violence on the animated series in television, and that led to a big crackdown from standards and practices on, and we wind up trying to figure out ways to throw pies without throwing pies.
Right.
So it was an amazing number of chain reactions that went on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And now you don't have just 3 outlets, but it's mushrooms. So
Yeah.
now everybody's competing for the airtime.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go.
So I'm getting they're cutting us off. Coming up on an hour and a half. This has been a really focused, tight discussion. No, I mean, you tune into this, and this is what you get. You know what I mean? Yeah. It is what it is. This is not a highly precision-driven show. So, all right, guys, you want to talk us out of here? We'll leave.
Yep. Any projects or any current promotions you guys want to talk about? Go ahead and plug them right now.
In progress.
Yeah,
Not ready for public consumption.
Flint, we'll pick up Agents of
Yeah,
Fortune.
Agents of Fortune. We got to pick it up and do it.
Oh, you do. That one needs to go.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. We're going to do that somewhere. The big award comes if you can find our old TV development.
Yeah.
Because
I think I have that. I think I might have a copy of that
I
somewhere.
think you probably do. If I know anything about Rick Merwin, unless something has damaged you over the years, you always kept everything.
Yeah.
And the difference is I kept it, but I can't find it. You can find it.
Well, I had to actually do like some computer magic at one point because the computers couldn't read the discs anymore.
Right.
So
Right.
I had to get them off the discs onto other media, that kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah, I'll dig it up. I think I have it somewhere. I'll dig it up, and
We will talk tomorrow.
we'll definitely talk.
All right, and as we get ready to say goodbye to our guests and sign off for today, just like to thank everyone for tuning in. Be sure to download your audiobook of The Gamesmaster, Almost Famous in the Geek 80s, available on audible.com right now, and you can pre-order your autographed hardbook from Rare Bird Publishing in the stream description. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to give us a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you've got any ideas for what you'd like to see on a future show, leave us a comment and we'll take a look. Stay tuned for more information on next week's stream. And again,